It's sort of a misnomer. The presentation should really be domestic violence awareness. It's very hard to prevent domestic violence, even with all the resources that are out there, whether it be through the police department, DVIS, legislation, all that stuff. It gets very, very difficult to stop it from happening. So really it's about awareness, even more so telling the community what to look for. What can you do if a family member, a friend, yourself, maybe be a survivor or victim of domestic violence. So with everything else, it's about the community recognizing that there's a problem, but also doing something about it. And hopefully once this 20 minutes is up, and if you have any questions, please interrupt me, because I may go down a rabbit hole, but I do like to, if you have a question, don't wait until the end, because we can discuss it as things come up. But really, I think everyone in here, if you think about it, has probably known a victim of domestic violence. Family, friend, church member, co-worker, and really it's about what can you offer them. Sometimes it's not just about calling the police. Sometimes it's just a referral to DVIS. Sometimes it's just being there. I talk about the commercial for mental health, where it's the two ladies sitting on the couch and all they ask is everything okay? Sometimes that's all it takes. It's not about having the solution. It's not about fixing a 10-year marriage that has been abusive, that may have alcoholism in it, mental health or things like that. It's just basically being there as a human saying, I'll be there. And there's a lot of issues that go along with that we'll discuss, but really it's about just being aware that it's out in our community. I'll talk about how it impacts Broken Arrow, what we do with DVIS, but ultimately awareness. That's all this is awareness that it's out there. I think we all know it's out there, but what do you do? What can you do? It's sort of easy to do this because it's not my problem. But again, we're in the position where we can actually help people. So what is domestic violence? Intimate partner violence. There's different words for a victim, a survivor. I use victim because I'm a cop. Advocates use survivor. But again, what is domestic violence? And I think if you say, what's domestic violence to most of the citizens, they'll go, well, it's like, someone punches them or, slaps them. But it goes well beyond just the physical attributes, because a lot of times the physical part of it is when we get involved, or there's a referral to DVIS, or maybe even the schools get involved because there's child abuse or something like that. But it goes well beyond just the physical aspect. There's financial control. It's all about control. The offender wants to control that victim for whatever reason. You get into the psychology of it. It really doesn't. It matters, but at the end of the day, we want to solve the problem, right? So we go through it. Just remember, it's all about control. And usually once it gets to the physical aspect, this has been ongoing for a long time. They start to, manage where they can go, what they do, track their, cell phones. It can take a very extreme route into stalking, to where they want to know where their spouse, their partner, girlfriend, boyfriend is at all times. And ultimately that control can lead to, physical violence. All right, so I think everyone has an understanding of domestic violence. If you want to read it up there, it's all. But again, that physical violence, those threats, and it actually just continues to escalate. There's a cycle of violence. If you want to get into it, some weeks are good. All right, there's some type of stressor, some type of event. There's altercation, some physical violence. We may be contacted. DVIS can intervene. Most of the time we don't, because we don't know about it. And then it goes back into like this, oh, I'm so sorry, it will never happen again, things like that. And you look at that cycle, just continue to perpetuate through the relationship until there's some type of intervention. And that's where the citizens come into play, where they can literally just go, wait a minute, time out. I know you have 3 kids together, you've been married to him or her for 10 years, whatever it is. It's like, do you really want to continue this? Because the escalation point is really what we try to intervene with, to where it doesn't happen. And criminal justice can only do so much. The police can only do so much. You look at criminal justice, it's police, right? We can do what we can do. Courts can do what they can do, and then corrections is like the very end one. And criminal justice reform in Oklahoma, things like that, it gets very difficult for the government to step in and stop them. We rely on DVIS. You look at our criminal investigation and prosecution, DVIS is completely opposite. They are there to support that victim, that survivor, to say, what can we do? It may not be putting the guy in jail for the rest of, for a year or things like that. It's getting him out of the situation, protective orders, counseling, whatever it is. It's like, we just need to get that person for even 2 seconds removed from that, emotional attachment to that relationship, and say, this is what we can provide you, and that's really what we look at. Depending on what statistic you use, what study you look at, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men. It can go up to like 1 in 5 women, 1 in 7. It's rampant across our society. And when you look at society, is why do we accept it? Well, I'm not going to get here and talk about everything in society, but ultimately 1 in 3 and 1 in 4. So the likelihood of someone in this room being a victim of some type of domestic violence, maybe not the actual physical assault, but controlling finances, things like that, is relatively high. Again, it's just the awareness that is in our community. So what does that mean in Broken Arrow? I did a deep dive into our actual domestic violence statistics, and these are actually reports that we investigated. This is not officers just going out to a verbal domestic. This is actually criminal reports that were investigated by detectives. So if you look at this, 397 in 2021, and obviously our jurisdictions, Tulsa County, federal, Muskogee Creek Nation, or municipal, but 397 in 2021. We go to 2022, it went up to 462. It's interesting, there's all sorts of theories behind why it's escalating. Some of it's awareness of our officers' part to say, hey, we recognize it, we're actually going to do something about it. Some of it's society. I actually ran the numbers, and we average around 400 to 450 actual criminal investigations related to domestic violence a year. All right, before 2017, we were 404. 2023, we're 588. All right, so it's definitely, it's depending on, economic conditions, weather, time of year, things like that. It certainly goes up and down, but we are seeing an increase in domestic violence. Again, I think some of that is awareness on our patrol officers to say, we need to do something about that. Even if I take the report and it goes to detectives, and detectives contact the victim says, no, it's much better. I think we're documenting it better, but we refer them to DVIS regardless. So DVIS is the second step where they reach out and say, hey, are you okay? Sometimes they're very good at getting a hold of people and extending those services. Other times it's, yeah, I'm fine, goodbye. So that's where we're at. That's Broken Arrow, all right? And just because, yes?
Why is it that we're referring them basically to DVIS in Tulsa and not having them sitting here?
I'm glad you asked. So we had a grant-funded victim advocate, which was not directly related to domestic violence, but all crimes. That grant was not renewed. We are actually in the process, and we're hopeful that we'll have a Broken Arrow Police Department victim advocate in place by probably sometime in March, which we're just sort of between the things. And so DVIS, we partner with them sort of for the short term to make sure that we're at least offering services to victims of domestic violence. But we should solve that issue within hopefully the next month or two.
That victim advocate, do they go out with the police to talk to the person?
They can. So a lot of it is follow-up. Domestic violence, things like that's follow-up. We can call them out to a scene. We use our victim advocate a lot with violent crime, to where if it's a significant crime, a homicide, things like that, really to support the family. We're just in between sort of a place where we have the grant and where we're actually going to fund it through Broken Arrow ourselves.
That seems such a large compared to Tulsa. I used to work for DVIS.
Right.
So I'm just curious
Why
it's such a large.
Right.
Is it because it's kind of a rural area too? And so more or less, unseen, kind of almost like with the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of kids being at home that were abused and no one knew anything about it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly think that we've seen an increase because we have really focused on domestic violence intervention in Broken Arrow. We've changed actually some of our protocols to ensure that we're doing everything we can for victims. But the unfortunate reality is we could do everything right and it may not stop it. You know, that's the hard part. And when you look at the criminal justice system, whether charges are filed, whether they see any jail time, you know, that's half the battle. The other half is actual victims. How do we get them engaged in the community to say they're not alone, first off, but also to really say there's another avenue we can take? Because ultimately our concern is we're trying to prevent future violence. You know, even if it's, you know, assault and battery, but what about strangulation, homicide, things like that? How do you get that to where we're not? And domestic homicides in Oklahoma, it's bad, right? Whether it's rural economics, things like that, depending on what research you look at. But we're using domestic violence. Like I said, we start interviews next week for our victim advocate, who will be housed within the police department, paid for the police department. It will not be tied to a grant, which gives us a little bit more avenues to make sure they're reaching out to what they need to do for the.
I actually met with both DA's offices, Tulsa County and Wagner County, and by far the biggest category they have is victims that don't want to assist in prosecution. And so prosecution is one piece of it, but what they have found is the quicker that victim can get in touch with some kind of assistance at the very beginning, within the first 3 or 4 days, the more likely they are to stick with that assistance. And that assistance is not concurrent with the prosecution. And even if they're not able to prosecute, if they get the victim into the right services, a lot of times that's actually what solves the problem. It's not, putting someone in jail a lot of times may stop it for a short period of time, but the victim will go right back to that relationship. And so getting him in the right services is really the key to stopping that cycle. So the majority of both DA's offices said their biggest stumbling block is to get victims to follow through with prosecution. And so a lot of times they use deferred sentences to force the offender into alcohol programs, anger management programs, but it's really more about the victim than it is the offender, because that's where we seem to have the biggest impact.
Thank you. I think this is just what I basically, said. The survivor stories are very unique. Everyone has different reasons. A lot of fear associated with it, finances associated with it. If you have kids, you throw a whole nother element to where maybe the victim can't leave the family because of their kids. You go into all this prevention, and again, it's awareness to know that it's in our community. And sometimes all it takes, again, is a citizen to say, hey, you see a coworker who's struggling, or maybe a church member, things like that, to say, what's going on? What's up? Can I help you? You don't have to have the solution. You just have to have the ability to really step out and say, hey, what's up? And maybe they'll, as you build that trust, you're able to do it. Because like I said, I think everyone in here knows a victim of domestic violence. It's out there, it's rampant. I remember being a young cop and I get called to domestics, and they've been married for 15 years and it's a domestic situation, and I'm 22 and I'm like, you want me to fix your, 15 years of marriage? I don't have that ability, right? But really it's about educating people to actually do something about it. Why does society continue to allow this to happen? And you can say that about a lot of crimes, human trafficking, drugs, things like that. But when you look at the impact domestic violence has on the community, whether it's, there's economic issues, there's school issues with kids being there, things like that, it's really something that we should really look at and say, what can we do to this? We're not going to solve it, period. Humans are humans. Relations are, what they are. But what can we do to actually, minimize the impact, and then really to get the victims the help they deserve and they need, right? So warning signs, this is really one of those just, I think it's intuitive that you think of domestic violence. What are the warning signs? And put this in the back of your head of when you're talking to a friend or a coworker. Maybe it's their family member and they're like, hey, my sister, they had to call the cops on Saturday night. If you know just a little bit, you can sort of help them direct them to the resources and say, yeah, that's horrible. What did you, maybe assist someone else who's assisting the victim, things like that. And again, it's really, I think we focus a lot on the physical aspect, but the control aspect starts almost from day one. Finances, things like that. Not being able to make your own decision in your life. The offender may, control everything about your life, and here you are just trying to make ends meet. You have 2 kids, whatever it is, plus a job, and what do you do? And there's a lot of hopelessness with victims and survivors, and they just don't know where to turn. And so really, it's up to us, whether it's advocacy, police officers, school teachers, counselors, you know, whatever, just to say, step in and, you know, almost take a time out to say, wait a minute, you know, I just had a, you know, presentation on this. This is what I can at least talk to you about. And really, if you just be there for them, I think that's the first check mark. All you have to do is be there with them, especially, and this is any type of victim. So in Broken Arrow, we do the lethality assessment, which is based on a study which shows 11 questions, and based on their yes or no response to those, we can actually, based on statistics, say that you're a higher likelihood of escalating violence. And when I said we made some changes, one of the big ones is strangulation, because you know you start out with a domestic assault and battery, and then all of a sudden it starts into strangulation, which is a different crime. You know, what's after strangulation? You know, you think of, okay, I get slapped. He's controlling my finances. Well, now he's holding me down and putting his hands, and I say his, I'm sorry, her, whatever. The offender's putting their hands around the victim's throat. You know, let's play this out. And that's where we really want to step in and say, okay, it's getting to the point where society needs to step in and do something about it. So we actually changed our wording on the lethality assessment. This is state law, and with the work of DVIS, our old one used to just say choke. Has an offender ever choked you? Now, if I say choke, what do you think about? Right. Yeah, right. Well, if I sit on you, can you breathe? Right? There's a restriction of air. If I put my hand up against you, my hands aren't around your neck, but if I'm forcing you against the wall, can you breathe? And so we actually changed this to sort of get not only the officers, but also the victims to say, okay, yeah, he slapped me, he threw me on the bed, and then sat on me, and I could not breathe, right? Theoretically, that meets the element of strangulation. And so we actually just changed this within the last couple of months. Also, we're getting to the point where this prompts a referral to DVIS, and like sort of what Chief said, a lot of victims at that time, it's emotional, they don't want to talk to an advocate. And so what happens is we have DVIS call them a couple days later. If it's a serious offense, I'll send Sharon an email, and she'll contact them almost the next day. If it trips that, you know, it's like, we've been out there 3 times this year, it's continuing to escalate, we'll actually try to get that referral quicker. But I will say within, in Broken Arrow with DVIS, I think the longest we'll have to have a referral is probably a week, because she gets a report. I've read every domestic report since October, and she gets the report and she reaches out to that victim. And it's just like everything else in life. Sometimes it's successful and sometimes they don't answer, right? Or, you know, what's even, you know, she still loves them, or they still love each other. It's very hard to break that cycle. And a lot of it's awareness of the victim, but also just awareness of the community going, if there's an advocate calling them, the police officers are saying, this is not going to turn out well for you, it's going to continue. You know, if there's not some prompt to get them out of the situation or change that relationship, it gets very, very frustrating, not only for the victim, but also for the community, because it's almost like it's hopeless, and that's what we want to sort of change. So here's the end idea of all this, is that there are resources out there. We partner with DVIS. We'll have our own victim advocate, which we will continue to partner with DVIS, Family and Children's. Both district attorneys in Weiner County and Tulsa County have victim as advocates. So when they actually propel into the court system, there is a victim advocate from the district attorney's office who can work with it. Federal government has victim advocates. They're out there, and basically it's like, so I give you all this information about, well, domestic violence is there, we recognize it, what do I do? And at the very least, ask them if they're okay. You may not get anywhere with that, but there are resources out there, right? DVIS, use them, that's why they're there, right? The police department uses DVIS. It's one, we don't have every, you know, tool in the toolbox when it comes to victims. We can solve the immediate threat, we can take offenders to jail, but ultimately, you know, this extends well beyond the police and even the criminal justice system to where DVIs can refer them. If finances, protective orders, housing, kids, whatever it is, DVIS can help them, all right? Interesting enough, the state has a support line, right? And as you can say, this was back, News on 9. We're ranked highest in the U.S. for domestic violence for men and women. Over 50% of Oklahomans right? So the state has their, elder abuse, things like that. It's really interesting when you look at domestic violence, and we see this a lot with a lot of our crime types. Human trafficking is the same way. There are so many crimes associated with domestic violence, child abuse, things like that, that it morphs into different things. Same thing for that. And so it's like elder abuse. What if it's, sexual assault, things like that? How do we get the information out to our citizens? If you don't like Oklahoma, there's national hotline, right? So we have local, we have state, we have the national hotline. This is the hotline.org. This is national. You can even text them. I think generational, you look at like younger adults, things like that, even into like high school age, when you look at victims, dating relationship violence, things like that. We even offer, you can text someone, and maybe it's just like, my boyfriend hit me or my girlfriend hit me last night, and it's just really opening the door for them to say, wait a minute, that's not cool, and what can we do to actually do something about it?
I can't see the text number.
88788.
Thank you.
I can hardly see it, so. So my point is local, state, federal, national, all right? Here's the other thing. It takes a Google search. I literally did domestic violence prevention, and DVIS comes right up on the side, right? And then also the national hotline, Center for Disease Control. The things with statistics and domestic violence, I just read a recent article where it looked at informal supporters of victims, and where it shows that informal support, everyone who's out in the community, can really have a difference to opening that door for that victim to get out of their situation. And I think a lot of times we're hesitant to do it because we don't know what to say, right? We're like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if what if it's a family friend and now you have the perpetrator mad at you? I don't want that drama in my life, right? And really it's about, just listening to them. I think there's a lot of issues with, placing blame on the victim. It's like, well, it's your fault, right? Well, it's really not. The crime is the crime, all right? There's a lot of circumstances around it, but we want to get away from that to where the hopelessness, the helplessness, I don't know what to say to them, really boils down to, be a human is literally what it comes down to. And again, there are so many circumstances surrounding domestic violence, surrounding how well you know that person, whether you want to step out of that box and sort of take that risk to say, hey, I'm here for you if you ever need anything. And they may never ask you for help, you're right, but I think certainly society can do a better job. It's sort of like kids in schools. The counselors are there to say, hey, what's up? And we may never find out what's up, but again, it's taking that little step forward to say, hey, we can actually do something about it. All right, it starts with you, right? Criminal justice, we recognize it's a problem. The state recognizes it's a problem. We try. Things like that, but really it goes well beyond the criminal justice system and the laws to where it's a community effort to really, it's not okay. And there's even research on why society has said we're gonna manage this. We know it's happening. We'll try our best to stop it formally, but what about the informal networks that can go out there and say, hey, time out. What can we do about it? So that is all I have. Whew. I talked a lot. Questions? Yes.
I have a question. So when you go out to a domestic violence call, do you also bring a woman with you when you go out?
Not necessarily. It depends. I will say it's really depending on the call. The circumstances of a call are here, and depending on, we are fortunate enough if a victim does request a female and we have a female officer on, we'll have the female officer come. I will say our officers are decent at really trying to help the victim, but that's certainly within our toolbox. You look at like sexual assault, things like that. Sometimes a female wants to talk to a female, and we certainly use that option available.
So, do you kind of keep in mind that, woman, she's been through domestic violence. You come out, first of all, you're a man. Mm-hmm. Most likely, she's probably not going to want to speak.
Right.
And I understand that, if she asked for one, but do you think that maybe it would be important to maybe also to bring one out there, even if she doesn't ask? Because, she may be afraid as it is, because who's perpetrated? a man.
Right.
And, you know, why am I going to ask a man
Yeah.
for help when, you know, I've just been abused by a man? So, I mean, it may be something, you know, maybe in the back of your mind that, okay, let me get a woman officer out if I can.
Right.
Or someone, you know, to speak to her. Because more than likely, she's not going to, you know, want to ask for help. You know,
Right.
Her first thing is maybe, okay, maybe let me get me out of this situation. And I'm sure, you know, the police officer's thinking the same thing. But, I mean, overall, she may need to speak to someone. I'm not quite sure how soon you do those assessments, and if the assessments are with the individual versus the police officer. When I kind of read it, it's kind of, you know, general. I'm not quite sure who's actually, you know, filling out that assessment when I see that. So, I mean, I'm just curious, you know, how you go about it, and the fact that we have more domestic violence incidents than Tulsa, and, you know, it makes me believe that we need a place here, because Tulsa is busting at the seams because they're getting people from Sand Springs, they're getting places from all over. And so, you know, it starts at home, and, you know, home is broken down. And that's something that maybe we need to invest in as far as looking at a place here.
Right. I will say our officers do, you can take domestic violence, mental health, any number of things, and, you know, if we go out on domestic violence and they request a female officer, we certainly have that in our toolbox. We have female detectives who can go there. We do the lethality assessment on scene, and we're asking the victim. It's just actually on scene. And I think a lot of times when the police are interjecting, it's to the point where we're going to try our best to solve the issue for the short term. And we're actually decent at it. It may not solve the continuing cycle, but that's where the referral to DVIS comes in, to give that victim enough information, sort of help guide them. But again, the government's not going to step in and say you can no longer, you know, date so-and-so or things like that. And that's where the struggle comes in. And, you know, we can arrest someone, they may get a jail sentence, they may not even, their charges may just be dismissed. But overall, I think the big community picture is to, you know, criminal justice, the formal path. Victim advocacy can do one thing. You know, citizens, community members, friends, family, church can sort of help bridge that gap to where we see it. But yeah, you bring up good points.